Well, welcome everybody. Good to see you all. We are in Luke chapter 8, and we talked last about Jesus stilling the storm and the fear and amazement that followed that. That's something we see a lot in the Gospel of Luke. The idea of people being amazed and even fearful at what they see from Jesus, and we sort of touched on that. Before. We'll touch on it again tonight as we look at some of these stories. We read them and perhaps we can't quite feel the same impact that the people who were there and witnessed these things must have felt as they wrestled with the whole notion of what kind of person can do these things. You know, who is this that he can do these things, and that's really I think one of the questions that Luke is most wanting to evoke from us, that we wrestle with this idea of who is Jesus? How does maybe who he is conflict even with some of the things that we may assume about him, or may have just sort of allowed to influence our view of it. And just on the heels of this amazing story where he commands the winds and the water and they obey him, we come to this another rather well-known story of a demon-possessed man, but not just an ordinarily, if there is such a thing as an ordinarily demon-possessed man, this is not him. This is unusual in a couple of ways that we'll see. So let's read together from Luke chapter 8, starting in verse 26. They sailed to the region of the Gerasenes, which is across the lake from Galilee. When Jesus stepped ashore, he was met by a demon-possessed man from the town. For a long time, this man had not worn clothes or lived in a house, but had lived in the tombs. When he saw Jesus, he cried out and fell at his feet, shouting at the top of his voice, "What do you want with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I beg you, don't torture me." For Jesus had commanded the impure spirit to come out of the man. Many times it had seized him, and though he was chained hand and foot and kept under guard, he had broken his chains and had been driven by the demon into solitary places. Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" "Legion," he replied, because many demons had gone into him. And they begged Jesus repeatedly not to order them to go into the abyss. A large herd of pigs was feeding there on the hillside. The demons begged Jesus to let them go into the pigs, and he gave them permission. When the demons came out of the man, they went into the pigs, and the herd rushed down the steep bank into the lake and was drowned. When those tending the pigs saw what had happened, they ran off and reported this in the town and countryside. And the people went out to see what had happened. When they came to Jesus, they found the man from whom the demons had gone out, sitting at Jesus' feet, dressed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. Those who had seen it told the people how the demon-possessed man had been cured. Then all the people of the region of the Gerasenes asked Jesus to leave them because they were overcome with fear. So he got into the boat and left. The man from whom the demons had gone out begged to go with him, but Jesus sent him away, saying, "Return home and tell how much God has done for you." So the man went away and told all over town how much Jesus had done for him. It's a really vivid story, isn't it? There's a lot of detail. There's a lot more detail than we often get with healing stories, and this is one of the more well-developed ones.
Would this be an area where non-Jewish people live?
It would. That's a good place as any to start. Yeah, it would. This is a Gentile territory on the other side of the Sea of Galilee, from as it says, from
They've been Greeks.
the area of Galilee. Yeah, probably. Well, whoever was living there at the time, I mean, Greco-Roman for sure, and Rome was still Rome had conquered that part of the world as well, so they were still under Roman authority. But probably a pretty good mix of people from various backgrounds and various ethnicities.
I ask because of the pigs.
Yes, and that's one of the interesting things about the story is the pigs. And you're right, a herd of pigs would not necessarily be something that you would find in much in Jewish areas, but certainly in Gentile areas you have a lot more pig farming, and for obvious reasons. And so so it is. It's very much a non-Jewish area, though I'm sure there were some Jews who would have lived there. It wasn't like there was a fence or anything, and obviously Jesus could come and go fairly freely across the lake. So I'm sure there was some back and forth, but yeah, predominantly a non-Jewish area, probably. What else? What do you see here? What do you notice about this story? What grabs you about it?
It's kind of interesting that this is the man who meets Jesus right off when he steps off out of the boat. Where's everybody else? But he evidently had an idea who Jesus was, and he's coming, and he knows Jesus is powerful. He can be more powerful than the demons inside of him.
Yeah.
So it's kind of interesting how he's right there,
Yeah, you do wonder if did the guy come looking for Jesus? Did he know about him and come looking for him, or was he that aware of anything? It's hard to say, but yeah, it is interesting that he meets this guy first. Though you sort of get the sense that maybe this guy, because he lives away from everybody else, that maybe Jesus comes ashore in sort of an isolated place and near this.
It's more like the demon is controlling this. Jesus doesn't talk to the man, he talks to the demon.
Yeah. And very, very much. The man seems very much under the control of the demons to some degree or the other. He's chained sometimes. It does say that many times it had seized him. So maybe there were times when he was more under its influence than others, but he sure does seem to be very much under the influence of the demon. And one of the things that strikes me about this story, the description of the man's situation, right? He doesn't wear clothes. He lives out in the tombs. He is isolated from people. I mean, there's very much a sort of a picture of him as the demon has made him into more animal than person. He's just out in the wilderness, out far away from everyone. Talk about outcast. And I mean, you can't really blame the people he lives around. He sounds like he's dangerous, right? It sounds like the guy is somewhat dangerous. And so they must feel sometimes that they must have felt if they can't chain him, they can't restrain him, they must have felt there was no other choice. And so this is a situation, and it's just an awful, a terrible situation for this guy.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Jesus asked, "What is your name?" And he said, "Legion." So, what is the reference behind this name? Does it have a special meaning?
Well, I think you've heard of the Roman legions, right? The Roman army was called the legion, and so I think perhaps it comes from that. There are some interpreters who really read this as sort of a judgment on Rome. I'm not sure I see that so much just from legion. It could just be a reference that people would be aware of, right? If there's a lot of us. There's many of us, and so we're called legion.
Well, keep in mind, a legion is 6,000 soldiers.
Right.
So that's a lot.
I mean, if we're being literal, right, that's a lot. Now, maybe it's just short for there's a lot of us, but I mean, yeah, I mean,
Well, but
clearly what they're driving, what the demons are driving at is There's more than one of us in here. So that's why I said this is somewhat unique. We don't see another story of a demon-possessed person, I don't think, where there are multiple demons in control here.
And there were smaller units that, you could have
Yeah.
referred to, like
Right.
a cohort or a century.
Yeah.
But it's clearly probably not exact, but it's
But a lot,
there to make a point.
a lot.
Mary Magdalene had 7.
Seven, that's right, you're right. I was sitting there nagging at the back of my mind I do think there is somebody else, but I couldn't think of it. You're right, Mary Magdalene had 7. So we know that at least.
He wins.
So, what?
He wins.
Yeah, this guy's got more probably than 7.
There's a lot more dialogue with this spirit from the last encounter that we recorded.
There
That
is.
was a few chapters back, but he allows him to speak.
Yeah,
That's what he
that is
cut off.
interesting, isn't it? That there's a lot more dialogue, but you don't get the sense that it's because somehow this is more difficult for Jesus, which is interesting. It's not like he's, it's a struggle still. It's just, he allows the demons to speak, and not only allows them to speak, what does he allow them to do?
And the pigs.
At their own punishment.
Request secondary accommodations, right? Yeah. Let us go into the pigs. How do you feel about that? I mean, some people really struggle with this, that Jesus lets the demons go into the pigs.
Pig farmers weren't very happy.
They certainly weren't very happy about
They
it.
lost their herd, and there's probably no insurance back then.
Right.
Well, I think,
Confronted Jesus about that. Maybe he gave him some money.
What happened to the demons once the pigs died?
Well, that's an interesting question, and
The abyss.
yeah, whatever the abyss is, probably that's where they wind up. Only they take a lot of pigs with them. Go ahead, Chrissy.
I think it, all the things we've been alluding to are very curious, that we really, there's a whole lot of the understanding of evil and the, and God and the relationship and the devil or whatever we want to, demons, and that we just don't, we only have little glimpses into what that reality really is. Because I had the same question, what is the abyss? They clearly know what they're talking about. And why would Jesus allow them to choose, and what does that all mean? Some of these things just make me think, we just don't have a clue about that bigger picture other than these little glimpses that we're allowed.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And one of the reasons we don't have a clue, this is just not something that there's much room for in our worldview. I mean, right? From demons are not something I think about much, except, sometimes it's a horror movie plot, right? But other than that, it's just not something that comes to mind much to me, and not something that we have a regular experience of. But it was something that in Jesus' time was apparently somewhat, commonplace is the wrong word, but it was not unheard of and familiar. People knew what they were, or thought they knew at least what they were dealing with.
But I mean, I think we
basically is the place of the dead. It's so it's sort of a sense that maybe the demons without a host die and are relegated to this shadowy underworld kind of existence.
Which did a hint or two in the Old Testament that
Yeah.
there's demons, but it seems that they were infested with them in Jesus' time.
In Jesus' time, it seems much more, it's something he certainly has contact with more. Of course, there were Jewish exorcists as well, and non-Jewish exorcists. There were other exorcists in Jesus' day. So it was something that it was.
We don't hear much about demon possession, right, in the church. But I happen to know the Catholic Church has a special unit of priests
Yes.
that do specialize in demon possession And they really believe in it. They think it's a ministry to get people depossessed. So it's a serious thing. I've seen a program on it a while back.
If you
Not
talk
going.
to, if you talk to Christians in some parts of the world, they will just say matter of factly, they've run into situations where you can best
Yeah.
describe it as a possession.
If you're
Now,
in Africa, you
they
hear about
they
it.
don't pretend to know
South
exactly, but they just kind of say, I've seen stuff, I've seen things, and so, I don't know, and it's easy to sort of write it off as mental illness or whatever that they didn't understand, but certainly, if you believe what the Gospels tell us about these events, Jesus is able to cast these beings out, and these beings like here have consciousness and are able to talk and able to interact with Jesus. But notice what what they say. They say immediately who Jesus is, Son of the Most High God, right? Which is then interesting because later on, when the man wants to go with Jesus and he sends him back, return home and tell how much God has done for you. Luke says, so the man went away and told all over town how much Jesus had done for him, which I think is an interesting little reference that Luke just sort of slips in there. that what this man knew of what God had done for him was through what Jesus did for him, and that's his frame of reference. And I think he's thinking to himself, what the demons knew about him is right, and he's singing Jesus's praises, God's praises.
It's kind of funny, he turns him into an evangelist.
Yeah.
Go out and tell the good news,
Yep.
And then Jesus hadn't started his church yet or anything, but beginnings of it.
First evangelist to the Gentiles.
Yeah.
Is,
Funny evangelist.
is this man, right? He goes back to his neighborhood, his part of the world, and tells what he's experienced, which is, I think, what we're all supposed to do, right? to share with people what Jesus has done for us, and there's a simplicity to that. There's sort of a joy in that. I think if you are, as we appreciate what Christ has done for us, to be able to talk about that is joyful. It's not something that is as difficult for us as we might think. Sometimes we think of evangelism as having to answer everybody's questions and arguing and proving your point and winning and at its simplest, it's you go out and you tell people what Jesus has done. And I think we can all do that. That's something we all are able to share. And look at the difference, right, between how Jesus finds the man and what happens when the townspeople get out to the outskirts there and find them. He was dressed in his right mind, sitting at Jesus's feet. What does that mean, sitting at Jesus's feet?
Listening to the teacher.
Yes, he's listening to the teacher. He's become a disciple, and is listening as Jesus teaches. How do the people react?
Not good.
Not well. Not good. Right? They're afraid. Pig farmers have got to be annoyed, and they ask him to leave because they're overcome with fear. I mean, here's the obstacle, right? This changes their whole little worldview, and they're not ready for that. So it's just easier for them to keep Jesus at arm's length, and that's the case sometimes. But I think that's why Jesus sends this man back to them. That perhaps he can overcome that initial fear with his story of what Jesus has done for him, and perhaps change some hearts.
I think they were afraid of him. These were very powerful demons, and he was more powerful than they were.
Yeah.
And that must have shook him up. to see this, and this man's changed life.
Yeah.
I just couldn't understand it.
Yeah.
Blew their minds.
Well, and you know, and maybe we don't take it seriously enough, but I think we'd be terrified too. If you saw somebody like this man and then saw Jesus so easily and completely transform him and heal him and return his humanity to him, you'd be afraid too, I think. I would.
Well, and there may be here some play because Greek thinking has in terms of distance and fullness, and you see right at the beginning when somebody comes near to Jesus, right? Even the demons cry out.
Mhm.
Drawing near to God causes reaction, causes change. And he does stay near Jesus then. But there's a contrast because the people of the region, they have a different reaction, right? They want Jesus to go away. They don't want to be confronted. They don't want him near anymore.
And what's the difference, right? They think they've got a pretty good life. Things are okay with them. Jesus came in and disrupted their comfortable little lives. On the other hand, this man doesn't have a life. I mean, he literally doesn't have a life. He lives among the dead. He's more animal than he is human. And I mean, so.
But it does illustrate a personal issue for us, hopefully, I think for us all, which is in trying to draw nearer to God, which we want to do. The nearer we come, the more our problems and our sins and other things are exposed. And I don't think we like that. And so we try to then back away. So it's a tension there.
Yeah, it is, and you know, and I feel like, you know, the old saying is true about how Jesus comforts the afflicted and afflicts the comfortable. You've heard that probably.
That's what the preacher's supposed to.
It's a little it's kind of trite, but there's a lot of truth to it. that sometimes Jesus afflicts us, and maybe in the places we need most to be afflicted. But you're right, Ron. It's hard for us sometimes to let him have that space and let him have that place in our lives.
I mean, they didn't have the benefit necessarily of expecting a Messiah or all of that stuff to know who he was. And I don't know, we say, we look at it like, well, unclean spirits talk all the time. Again, I would say we don't know that evil spirits, demon thing because we're not used to it. But I don't know. We don't know that this guy, I mean, we don't know that everyone else was talking to the spirits. I mean, I think just that would be scary.
Mm-hmm.
To see anybody, whoever he was, and these voices or whatever were, who was, you know, it wasn't the man, having a whole chat with this fellow. You don't know, maybe he's one of them. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
I mean, you have the reason we're supposed to look at this story and think more about it is because his life was transformed for the better. So that's what we look for. But I can see that in many ways it would be scary. Like, is he an evil spirit or is he, you know what I mean? They don't have the benefit we do. But
Me and a pig next.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a whole lot that's, and isn't that true about most everything as human beings? There's a lot that we don't know. Our perspective is limited. Our way of seeing the world is very, very tinted by experiences and by where we've been and where we've come from, and sometimes it can be very hard to see beyond that. And I think that's what's going on with these people who push Jesus away. What's the saying that comes to mind here? better the devil you know. I mean, quite literally here, right? It's almost like, I mean, they know what to do with this guy. Just keep him out in the tombs and keep him away from everybody, and you're fine. With this Jesus guy, we don't know what to do. And so, I mean, literally, there's sort of almost a reaction against him, definitely a reaction against him. Someone's listening.
Well, one thing we do forget sometimes is, and I think we probably all had this experience, especially in Chicago, you know, you're walking out down the sidewalk and you see coming towards you somebody who's acting very erratically, right? And you think drunk, high, crazy, you don't know, but it's obvious this person is not acting what you would consider within the normal parameters of stuff. Most of us don't go up to him and meet him. As a matter of fact, I would suggest none of us go up and meet him. So it's really quite extraordinary that Jesus does. Maybe he was the Son of God, you know, and didn't find this situation to be of concern, and something he could handle. But I don't think many of us would feel that way.
No.
And as a matter of fact, you can imagine the other people in the boat saying, Jesus, get back in, get back in, Bill, get back in.
Don't look at him. What are you saying? Don't make eye contact. Yeah. Well, we go from that then to another story, and then Luke just has these sections where he just rapid fire just hits us with one thing after another, and you have that same, you know, so you had stilling the storm, you've had these demons removed from this man, and then you have in verse 40, now when Jesus returned, a crowd welcomed him, for they're all expecting him. He comes back to Capernaum, I suppose, and there a man named Jairus, a synagogue leader, came and fell at Jesus' feet, pleading with him to come to his house because his only daughter, a girl of about 12, was dying. As Jesus was on his way, the crowds almost crushed him. And a woman was there who'd been subject to bleeding for 12 years, but no one could heal her. She came up behind him and touched the edge of his cloak, and immediately her bleeding stopped. Who touched me? Jesus asked. When they all denied it, Peter said, Master, the people are crowding and pressing against you. But Jesus said, someone touched me. I know that power has gone out from me. Then the woman, seeing that she could not go unnoticed, came trembling and fell at his feet. In the presence of all the people, she told why she had touched him and how she had been instantly healed. Then he said to her, Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace. While Jesus was still speaking, someone came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue leader. Your daughter is dead, he said. Don't bother the teacher anymore. Hearing this, Jesus said to Jairus, don't be afraid, just believe, and she'll be healed. When he arrived at the house of Jairus, he did not let anyone go in with him except Peter, John, and James, and the child's father and mother. Meanwhile, all the people were wailing and mourning for her. Stop wailing, Jesus said. She is not dead, but asleep. They laughed at it, knowing that she was dead. But he took her by the hand and said, My child, get up. Her spirit returned, and at once she stood up. Then Jesus told them to give her something to eat. Her parents were astonished, but he ordered them not to tell anyone what had happened. So what jumps out at you about this? Sort of two healings in one, or a resurrection and a healing, you know, for the price of one.
Well, first of all, he didn't have to go to Jairus's house
Right.
at all. He could have just pronounced her healed, and because he had done it before,
Yeah,
right? So that's interesting that okay, I'll go to your house. And then the last verse is also kind of interesting in contrast to the previous story. He tells the man to go and tell everybody what God did, and here he tells the parents, don't say anything to anyone.
Why? What do you think the difference is?
The people he was telling before, he was going to speak to before were Gentiles.
Yeah.
So it wasn't going to impact the progress of his ministry, but he
I-
didn't
I
want to
think
get
that's-
the
that's why-
Jews,
Well,
he didn't want to get the Jews too provoked
Yeah.
at this point to unduly hasten things.
I think that explains it very well. Jewish people have very specific expectations about Messiah and, and the things Jesus was doing really fit a lot of those, but he was not seemingly, and it's a very complex subject, so it's not something we're gonna solve tonight, but that the whole secrecy of Jesus secrecy of Jesus' Messiahship is an interesting thing to look at, and I think it's best explained by what Ron said, that to stoke those fires too early would perhaps Jesus felt be detrimental to what he was trying to do. So yeah, so for the guy in the Gentile country with no expectations, sure, go tell everybody. Here he tells the parents, just shh, let's keep this between us, because this is provocative, right? What Jesus has done, to say the least. I like the fact that it's Jairus' daughter. And then in the crowd, the woman who touches him, he calls her daughter. I think that's neat. Daughter of Israel, daughter of God. I mean, it's this family terminology that he uses in other places too.
Don't you think she would have been seen as unclean though?
She would have been.
Kind of like a leper.
She would have been
Bleeding.
ritually unclean. She would have been probably considered ritually unclean by anybody who knew what was going on, what was happening. She would have considered herself that way as well.
Probably been separated from the community. Lonely.
And
Desperate.
yeah, and there are other some of the other gospels that have this story that talk about how she'd spent all she had on doctors before, and nobody could help.
So she becomes an object lesson, I think.
Yeah.
One thing you get out of it. That Jesus can heal, Jesus can bring you together. He can-
What's the interesting thing though about this story? What's the unique thing?
Well, she doesn't ask him to be, he doesn't even know who it is that that touched him and caused this power to, I think that's the first time, the only time that I've ever heard that expression, that this power goes out of him
It's
when
gone
he
out.
does those
Not like
things.
Superman. Wow.
A couple of interesting things to me there. I mean, one of them is, again, one of the other gospels gives you some insight into the woman's thought processes. If I can just touch the edge of his garment, I'll be healed. Luke doesn't have that inner monologue, but if I could just touch it, and then he refers to her faith, right? Your faith is healing. He's sort of saying, I didn't really heal you. I mean, I did, but it was through your faith, and what a great illustration of faith and the salvation that we have through faith. That to trust in Jesus is to receive that power to be healed and to be saved, and so this woman shows this great. It's sort of like the man with the centurion with the servant who was sick. That I've not found this kind of faith in all of Israel. Well, I think she gives the centurion a run for his money because she's just thinking, I can just creep up behind him. The other thing that's interesting, so if she is unclean, and according to law she would be, to go up and touch somebody is, rather bold, and generally would be considered to sort of transmit the uncleanness. Luke specifically says it worked in reverse, right? The power went out from Jesus to make this woman clean, to heal her, instead of the other way around. So again, we're getting this sense of Jesus's power, his ability to heal, the way he turns that power toward blessing people who are in desperate need. This Gentile, this demon-possessed Gentile out in the tombs, living among the dead bodies, this woman who is unclean, and then the girl who has died. By the time he gets there to Jairus' house, of course, she's gone. And everybody just thinks it's over. And Jesus says, she's not dead, but asleep. What do you think of that? I heard somebody say one time, don't look at Jesus as a model for how to behave at funerals, because he disrupted everyone he ever attended. There's probably some truth in that. What do you think about about his statement and the way that people responded to it?
At the time, he didn't want them to know that he could raise the dead.
Didn't want to know? Yeah. She's not dead, but asleep, and they laugh at him. It's almost like the townspeople with the demon-possessed man all over again, right? We don't have a category for this guy. This is just crazy talk. She's not dead, but asleep, and they literally seem to laugh at him for this statement, which seems a little insensitive at a funeral. But anyway,
Well, by all they knew, she was dead.
yeah,
I mean, sometimes, you hope, well, maybe the person is just asleep, or, and we'd like to think that, but I mean, feel for her heartbeat and breath, or whatever, however they would have determined that she was dead. So by all they knew, she was. So for him to say, "Oh, she's just asleep," they thought, "What, what is this guy?"
it's interesting as you read the story after that. He tells Jairus, "Don't be afraid, just believe, and she will be healed." Which, that's interesting, right? Actually, saved is the word. It's the word for saved or healed, or it can have a lot of meanings. But raised is not what he says. He doesn't let the mourners go in. Tells them to stop wailing. I mean, in a sense, I think the point is he's more right than they are, right? I mean, okay, the life signs are not there, but for him, I mean, this is kind of the way he was thinking about the situation. It seems, and he, he was confident in God's power to raise this girl, to heal this girl.
And it said whatever it means her spirit had left her,
Yes,
because he said it
her
returned.
spirit returned.
So-
and at once she stood up.
I mean, she was dead.
She was gone. She was gone. But Jesus really didn't use language like that. And again, contrast it with Lazarus, right? Lazarus is dead. With Lazarus, he just says it. With this, is he being tactful? I don't know. But is he teaching something? But that does seem different. That he doesn't verbally acknowledge that they're right. He's dead, even though, as it says, the spirit right. This is a resurrection. This is a return from death. But it's just fascinating.
There may also be a little bit of a tie-in here. There's that sort of puzzling line. Then Jesus told them to give her something to eat.
Mm-hmm.
And it's almost like Luke, you want to prove somebody is alive? They eat.
Yeah.
Because in Luke 24, that's going to be one of the things that Luke cites. Jesus says, "Give me some fish to eat." I think we already saw also, right, Peter's mother-in-law, upon being healed, right? She immediately
Yeah. gets up
hustled
and gives-
around to give people. Luke seemed to like food a good amount. He has this interest in it, but I think it is because it shows something.
Yeah.
It shows that somebody is back to normal.
Yep, that's right.
I also think the Jairus is interesting because he's a synagogue leader. He goes to Jesus. Seems like on the way back to the house, they find out that the daughter died, and he's told basically to keep the faith. That would be a hard journey back to the house.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Don't be afraid, just believe. I mean, that's, boy, easy, talk about easier said than done, right? But Jesus is assuring them, don't be afraid, just believe she'll be healed. And she is. And again, we're seeing this power that Jesus has to change things that are not changeable, right? We're gonna drown, don't you care, we're gonna drown. The demon-possessed man who has to live in the tombs, he can't even have a human kind of life. This woman who had this bleeding forever and can't be healed, and then this little girl who's died. He changes things that are unchangeable. He saves people who are unsaved. Over and over again, we see this. Luke just hammers you with this. This is what he comes to do. This is where he directs his power, and that's pretty remarkable.
Well, it may have been pretty difficult for the synagogue leader to approach Jesus.
Oh, for sure.
Which would have been a huge, which, you sometimes in desperation make unlikely alliances. It actually just sort of occurred to me, because that was something I was been reading. Winston Churchill once remarked, if Hitler invaded hell, I would at least make a favorable reference to the devil in the House of Commons. In desperation. And so, but the thing is, Jesus would have known that. And it didn't stop him from healing the daughter.
Yeah, this has got to be difficult. I mean, with all that we've seen him already cause some trouble in the synagogue, right? Now, that's not necessarily the same synagogue, but it's still just a difficult situation that Jairus finds himself in. This is a guy who people are important people are kind of looking cross-eyed at this guy, and yet he knows, I've got nothing else. I've got no other hope, and goes to it and finds this grace.
You know what just hit me as we're talking about all this? Of course, Jesus' compassion and his willingness to do what everybody's turning away from, but it's also his actions based on, and you kind of mentioned it a little bit, but the faith of the individuals. Of course, the dead girl's faith, not quite there, but the dad, but their faith. And it was coupled with him being able to do what he did. And so it's so important that we have this, well, that's what faith is, I would imagine, but this belief, this movement towards something that seems so unreachable in our daily lives, that even society or culture or family disagrees with what you're trying to, or what you're desiring, but your faith is there that it can happen. Mm-hmm. And Jesus matches that.
Yep.
To me, that's what's powerful too, right? It's the individual's faith that goes not just because I have faith because it's Jesus, but it's against their society, it's against family, friends. Like you're saying, they're rolling their eyes at him because he said, my daughter's dead, and Jesus says he's asleep, and people are like, why are you believing that dude? But he does. And so it's so incredible how God is aware of our faith in that regard. And that if we have faith, even when it's different than what the people and the culture and society and all around us is doing, that we can continue to move ahead. And maybe that's why the bleeding woman was quiet. That's a woman bleeding, unclean, touching Jesus or anyone for that matter.
Yeah.
Faith was bigger than, it's bigger than us. Even our faith can be bigger than us. And that's powerful, right? That I can have a faith that's bigger than me.
Yeah.
Because I'm thinking of Jesus, who's bigger, he's vast.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, good point. And you're right, faith is central to a lot of these stories. We saw it in the this still in the storm. Believe. We see it here again with Jairus and the woman. Both her faith is noted, and he is encouraged to have faith. It's the second time in Luke, by the way, that somebody has had faith for someone else, for someone else's healing. You know what I mean? We have it with the friends of the paralyzed man as well. When Jesus saw their faith, he responded. And so again, remember how Luke introduces his book. I decided to write an orderly account for you, most excellent Theophilus, so that you may know the certainty of the things you have been taught. That's what the purpose of this gospel is, to help people to believe, to help people to trust in Jesus and what he does, what he can do.
So I was thinking along those lines, why are the stories here? To show us who Jesus was. And I was also thinking there were other people who lost their daughters and
Yep.
other people whose illnesses weren't healed. And so if the lesson we take is, all you have to do is have faith and you'll be healed, we're going to be awfully lost, I think.
Right.
Yeah, I mean,
That's really good.
I agree with Colette about the importance of faith, but I'm not sure that we measure faith in the right way. I think sometimes we think we can muscle through faith, or certain people just have more of it and they have no doubts, and they just therefore they can, push through with God. They can force God by their faith. And I'm not sure that I know Colette wasn't thinking that, but I think naturally we sort of think add more force to it. But I don't think God necessarily sees our faith in that way. And I'm always touched in these stories about how, you're not certain that these are paragons of without doubt. And when you actually read some of the lives of the saints here on earth, or people who have done amazing things, you often find that they had lots of doubts. They were sometimes racked with doubt. And my favorite story actually in all of the Bible is in Mark, of the guy who said, Lord, I believe, help my unbelief.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So I faith, how do you measure what they had? All of these people had faith, but again, we shouldn't disqualify ourselves. God somehow evaluating what touches God, what touched Jesus in these people's faith was not that they were devoting themselves 100% to prayer, and it's complicated. And I don't know what the answer is either.
Well, but see, that's why I say it's bigger than us. Faith is bigger than us. It's everything you're saying. I can do something in an hour, maybe correct. It doesn't mean my faith is greater than anybody else's or less than. And so that's why you just have to keep putting one foot in front of the other, and God makes the final, not about final, but he makes the call whether to act in whatever regard, like the bleeding woman, et cetera, et cetera. But we don't deem that, we don't call that to be, because it's bigger than us. We just are called to live our life.
One of the things that comes to mind that in all this is Jesus' statement: if you have faith like a mustard seed, right? You can do incredible things. If you can just muster up a little bit of faith. And I think I think the point is quantifying it is not necessary and not possible anyway.
But if you can't move a
faith-
mountain,
There's a faith in the moment, right? There's a faith in the moment. Like Jairus's, like Jairus, right? He's at this, he's hit the limit, right? Jesus, she's gone, Jesus can't do anything anymore, and he says, just believe, just trust, just a little bit, just give me a little bit to work with, and she'll be all right. And I think that's the model that maybe we're getting at. That it's not something we can compare. It's not something we can quantify or it's just, can you believe? Can you trust that Jesus can help? That Jesus can do this? And in those moments, Christy, like you mentioned, when you believe and there is no healing and there is no miracle, then what do? Well, I think Jesus would say, just believe, just trust, just believe. And that's hard. That's not an easy thing to do. And that's why we need, I think, the grace of God and to help us in that.
I would go so far as to say he would suggest, and in those moments when you don't, I'm still there.
Yeah. I don't think, right. I don't think the times when we waver causes him to shut the door, right? I just think, I think the point of it is, if we can trust just a little bit, then we turn toward him. And it's that turning toward him and that openness toward him that I think is so important to the relationship. Not necessarily because he needs that, though, but because we need that. We need to have that trust in God, that trust in Jesus. And so I think that's why he wants that openness toward him and that turning toward him, so that we can receive what he will give. Because that's often the problem, I think. We give up and don't receive what he would give because we've stopped looking for it, maybe. And even then, he still gives us grace, right?
And at the same time, it's when, at least according to one person that I was reading, it's when you are asking for something and you're asking for something and you're not feeling God in your life and you're not seeing him do what you feel like you really need done. And you still make the decision that I am going to believe.
Mhm.
That's admirable faith. I mean, that's showing faith in God to just keep on persevering there.
That's Jairus in this story, right? Okay. If you say so, I'm gonna try. I'm gonna give my best, and help me in my moments of unbelief, as you cited. Thank you guys for your comments. We need to wind things down. 8:30, but next week we will get into chapter 9. I kind of meant to tonight, but that's all right. These are two good stories to get hung up on, so it's fine. We spent some time with these. I think they're important.